Cursed bride. Kasha Winter had always heard whispers in the trees, voices calling her name when no one else was around. But when the howling stopped and the village bells tolled in warning, the silence felt worse. The air smelled of pine and iron. The shadows stirred. And then he appeared golden-eyed, unreadable. "You should have never ignored the call," he murmured. "Now it will not stop until you answer." Chapter 1. The Whispers of Hollowfong Forest. The wind carried secrets through Hollowfong Forest, rustling the ancient pines and whispering through the leaves in a language Kasha Winter had understood since she was a child. Not words, precisely, but feelings, impressions, warnings. At 57, she was no longer the wide-eyed girl who'd chased butterflies through the dappled sunlight, convinced the trees were speaking directly to her. Years of practicality, of running the small village bakery and caring for her ailing mother, had dulled the edges of that magic. Or so she'd thought. The whispers had intensified lately, a constant hum beneath the surface of everyday life. It was a restless energy, a prickling unease that settled in her bones. Kasha tried to ignore it, chalking it up to the stress of her mother's worsening condition and the looming anniversary of her husband, Thomas's, death. 5 years had passed since the sea had claimed him, leaving a void in her life that no amount of sourdough or apple pie could fill. The village of Oakhaven, nestled at the edge of Hollowfong, was a place of quiet routine and deep-rooted traditions. Generations had lived and died under the watchful gaze of the ancient forest, respecting its power, fearing its depths. The old stories spoke of creatures that roamed the woods, beings of shadow and claw, guardians of a forgotten magic. Kasha had dismissed them as folklore, bedtime tales to keep children from straying too far. But the whispers made her question everything. Today, the air was thick with the scent of impending rain. Dark clouds gathered overhead, mirroring the turmoil in Kasha's heart. She stood on the porch of her small cottage, the bakery's sweet aromas clinging to her apron, watching the wind whip through the trees. The whispers were louder now, almost frantic, a chorus of voices calling her name. Kasha, Kasha, it wasn't just the wind. She knew it. A shiver ran down her spine, a cold dread that settled in the pit of her stomach. She wrapped her arms around herself, the worn wool of her shawl offering little comfort. Her mother's frail voice called from inside. "Kasha, dear? Is everything all right?" Kasha forced a smile, pushing down the rising panic. "Just admiring the storm, Mother. I'll be in shortly." Her mother, Eleanor, had been confined to her bed for the past year, her body ravaged by a creeping illness that stole her strength and her memories. Caring for her was a full-time job, one that left Kasha exhausted but filled with a fierce, protective love. Eleanor was all she had left. She turned back to the forest, her gaze drawn to the deepening shadows. The whispers were a tangible presence now, a pressure against her ears, a pull on her soul. She felt an inexplicable urge to walk into the woods, to follow the voices, to find the source of the unsettling energy. It was a foolish impulse, dangerous even. She knew the stories. She knew the warnings. Suddenly, the howling started. A low, mournful sound that echoed through the valley, sending a wave of primal fear through Kasha. It wasn't the familiar howl of a lone wolf. This was different, deeper, more resonant, imbued with a power that vibrated in her very core. It was a sound that spoke of ancient things, of wild magic and untamed hearts. The village bells began to toll, a frantic clangor that shattered the uneasy quiet. It was the warning bell, the one that hadn't been rung in decades, the one that signaled danger, the one that told everyone to lock their doors and stay inside. Fear, raw and immediate, clawed at Kasha's throat. Then, just as abruptly as it had begun, the howling stopped. The silence that followed was even more terrifying, a heavy, suffocating blanket that pressed down on Oakhaven. The wind died, the rain held its breath, and the whispers faded into nothingness. It was the absence of the sound, the sudden void where the voices had been, that truly unnerved her. Kasha felt exposed, vulnerable, as if the forest itself was holding its breath, waiting. The air shifted, carrying a new scent pine, sharp and clean, overlaid with something else, something metallic and primal.
Iron.
The smell of blood. Kasha's heart hammered against her ribs. She strained her eyes, peering into the deepening gloom. A figure emerged from the edge of the forest, walking with a slow, deliberate grace that was both mesmerizing and unsettling. He was tall, his silhouette stark against the fading light, his presence radiating a power that made the air crackle. As he drew closer, Kasha could make out details: dark, windswept hair, a strong jawline, and eyes that glowed with an unnatural golden light. He stopped a few feet from her porch, his gaze locking onto hers. It was an intense, unwavering stare, one that seemed to see straight through her, to the hidden depths of her soul. Kasha felt a strange mixture of fear and something else. A pull, a recognition, a sense of inevitability. He was a stranger, yet she felt as if she had known him forever. His face, though undeniably handsome, was etched with a weariness, a sadness that resonated with her own grief. There were lines around his eyes, testament to years of hardship and hidden burdens. He wore clothes that seemed out of place in Oakhaven: dark leather and rough spun cloth, the attire of someone who lived on the edges of civilization. He spoke, his voice a low rumble that sent shivers down her spine, even as it strangely calmed the frantic beating of her heart. "You should have never ignored the call, Kasha Winter." His words were not an accusation, but a statement of fact, heavy with a weight she couldn't comprehend. "Now, it will not stop until you answer." His gaze held hers, a silent question hanging in the air. What call? What answer? Kasha's mind reeled, struggling to make sense of the situation. She wanted to speak, to demand answers, but the words caught in her throat. The golden light in his eyes intensified, and for a moment, she saw something else flicker there, a flash of pain, a glimpse of something ancient and wild. Then, from inside the cottage, her mother cried out, a weak, frightened sound that pierced through the strange spell that had fallen over Kasha. The sound grounded her, reminding her of her responsibilities, of the life she knew. She tore her gaze away from the stranger, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. What would happen now? Chapter 2. The scent of pine and iron. Eleanor's cry had shattered the strange, magnetic pull the golden-eyed stranger held over Kasha. Reality, harsh and demanding, crashed back in. Kasha turned abruptly, her hand instinctively reaching for the worn wooden handle of the front door. The scent of baking bread, usually so comforting, now felt cloying, a stark contrast to the wild, metallic tang of iron that lingered in the air from the stranger's presence. "Mother!" Kasha called out, her voice trembling slightly. She pushed open the door and hurried inside, her eyes adjusting to the dim light of the cottage. Eleanor lay in her bed, her face pale and drawn, her eyes wide with fear. "Kasha, I heard something." Her voice was frail, barely a whisper. Kasha knelt beside the bed, taking her mother's hand in hers. Eleanor's skin was paper-thin, her bones fragile beneath Kasha's touch. "It's all right, Mother. It was just the storm. The wind can play tricks." She tried to sound reassuring, but her own heart was still racing. She could still feel the stranger's gaze on her back, a palpable weight that made her skin prickle. Eleanor clung to her hand, her grip surprisingly strong. No, it wasn't the wind. It was something else. Something wild. Her eyes darted around the room, searching for an unseen threat. Kasha squeezed her hand gently. "You're safe, Mother. I'm here." She glanced towards a window, her gaze drawn to the edge of the forest. The stranger was still there, a dark silhouette against the gathering twilight. He hadn't moved, hadn't made any attempt to approach. He was simply watching. The silence stretched, broken only by Eleanor's ragged breathing and the distant rumble of thunder. Kasha tried to calm her own racing thoughts, to focus on her mother's needs. But the image of the stranger, his golden eyes, his cryptic words, kept intruding. "You should have never ignored the call." The words echoed in her mind, a haunting refrain that she couldn't shake. She forced herself to focus. She helped Eleanor sip some water, smoothed her hair, and adjusted her blankets. The familiar routine, the small acts of care, helped to ground her, to push back the rising tide of unease. "Tell me a story, Kasha," Eleanor whispered, her voice weaker now. "Tell me about Thomas." Kasha's heart ached at the mention of her husband's name. The pain of his loss was a constant companion, a dull ache that never fully went away. But she pushed it down as she always did, and forced a smile. "Of course, Mother." She began to tell a story, a familiar tale of how she and Thomas had met, of their early days together, of their shared dreams. Her voice was soft and soothing, a balm for both her mother's fears and her own. As she spoke, she glanced out the window again. The stranger was still there, unmoving, a silent sentinel in the gathering darkness. She wondered who he was, what he wanted. Why had he come to Oakhaven? Why had he spoken those strange words to her? The storm finally broke, rain lashing against the windows, wind howling through the eaves. The sound was a welcome distraction, a natural force that drowned out the lingering echoes of the stranger's voice and the unsettling silence that had preceded him. Eleanor drifted off to sleep, her breathing becoming slow and regular. Kasha watched her for a moment, her heart filled with a mixture of love and sorrow. She knew her mother's time was growing short, and the thought filled her with a deep, abiding sadness. She stood up, her joints stiff from kneeling. She walked to the window, her gaze drawn to the edge of the forest. The stranger was gone. The only evidence of his presence was the lingering scent of pine and iron, a faint but persistent reminder of the unsettling encounter. Kasha closed the curtains, shutting out the storm and the darkness. She lit a lamp, the warm glow pushing back the shadows that had gathered in the cottage. She felt a strange mix of relief and disappointment. The stranger had disturbed her, frightened her, yet his presence had also sparked something within her, a flicker of something she hadn't felt in years. Curiosity? Excitement? Fear? She couldn't name it. She went to the kitchen, her movements automatic, her mind still racing. She began to prepare a simple supper, chopping vegetables, stirring a pot of soup. The familiar tasks were a comfort, a way to ground herself in the present moment. But her thoughts kept returning to the stranger, to his golden eyes, to his cryptic words. The call. What call? She had heard whispers all her life, whispers in the wind, whispers in the trees. But she had always dismissed them as her imagination, a childhood fancy that she had never quite outgrown. Could the stranger have been referring to those whispers? She paused, her hand hovering over the pot of soup. A sudden thought struck her, a memory from her childhood. Her grandmother, a woman steeped in the lore of Hollowfong, had told her stories of the forest, of the creatures that lived within it, of the ancient magic that permeated the land. She had spoken of a bond, a connection between certain people and the forest, a call that could not be ignored. Kasha had dismissed those stories as fairy tales, the ramblings of an old woman. But now, standing in her kitchen, the scent of pine and iron still lingering in the air, she wondered if her grandmother had been telling the truth. She finished preparing supper, her appetite gone. She ate a small portion, forcing herself to swallow each bite. Her mind was a whirlwind of questions, doubts, and fears. After supper, she checked on her mother, who was still sleeping peacefully. She tidied up the kitchen, her movements slow and deliberate. She felt a deep weariness, a bone-deep exhaustion that went beyond the physical. She went to her bedroom, a small, cozy room at the back of the cottage. She undressed, her movements mechanical, her mind still preoccupied. She slipped into her nightgown, the soft cotton a comfort against her skin. She climbed into bed, pulling the covers up to her chin. She lay there in the darkness, listening to the storm raging outside. The wind howled, the rain beat against the windows, but the sounds were no longer comforting. They were a reminder of the wildness that lay just beyond her doorstep, the wildness that had sent the golden-eyed stranger to her door. She closed her eyes, trying to will herself to sleep. But sleep wouldn't come. Images of the stranger, his face, his eyes, his words, flashed through her mind. She tossed and turned, her body restless, her mind unable to find peace. What was going to happen to her quiet, predictable life? Chapter 3. The Golden-Eyed Stranger. Sleep evaded Kasha. The storm outside had calmed to a steady drizzle, but the storm inside her raged on. Every creak of the house, every rustle of leaves outside her window, sent a jolt of anxiety through her. Finally, she gave up the pretense of rest and rose, pulling on a thick robe against the chill of the pre-dawn air. The cottage was quiet, bathed in the soft, gray light that precedes sunrise. Eleanor was still asleep, her breathing shallow but even. Kasha tiptoed to the kitchen, her bare feet silent on the wooden floor. She put on a kettle, the familiar ritual a small comfort in the midst of her unease. As the water heated, she found herself drawn to the front window, her gaze searching the edge of the forest. There was no sign of the stranger, but the memory of his presence was vivid, the scent of pine and iron still faintly discernible in the air. It was as if he had left a part of himself behind, a lingering echo of his power. She wrapped her hands around a warm mug of tea, the heat seeping into her chilled fingers. She sipped slowly, her thoughts circling back to the stranger's words. The call. It was a phrase that resonated with a deep, forgotten part of her, a part that had always felt a connection to the forest, to the whispers in the wind. A sudden noise made her jump a sharp rap at the front door. Her heart leaped into her throat. Could it be him? She hesitated, her hand hovering over the latch. Fear warred with a strange sense of anticipation. Taking a deep breath, she opened the door. He stood there, just as she remembered him, tall and imposing, his dark hair damp from the rain, his golden eyes piercing in the dim light. He was even more striking in the daylight, his features more defined, the lines of weariness around his eyes more pronounced. He wore the same dark clothing, the leather and rough spun cloth that spoke of a life lived outside the confines of Oakhaven. "May I come in, Kasha Winter?" His voice was low and resonant, the same voice that had haunted her dreams, or rather, her sleepless night. Kasha hesitated, her mind racing. She knew she should be afraid, that she should send him away, but something held her back. A curiosity, a pull, a sense that her life was about to change irrevocably. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice steadier than she expected. He gave a slight smile, a flicker of something that might have been amusement in his golden eyes. "My name is Reese, and I believe we have much to discuss." Kasha stepped aside, allowing him to enter. The cottage seemed to shrink with his presence, the familiar space suddenly unfamiliar. He moved with a grace that belied his size, his movements silent and controlled. He glanced around the room, his gaze taking in the details, the worn furniture, the handmade quilts, the lingering scent of baking. His eyes lingered for a moment on a framed photograph on the mantelpiece, a picture of Kasha and Thomas, taken years ago, their faces young and full of hope. "Your husband?" he asked, his voice softer now. Kasha nodded, a lump forming in her throat. He died 5 years ago, lost at sea. Reese's gaze met hers, and for a moment, she saw a flicker of understanding, of shared pain, in his golden eyes. "I am sorry for your loss." The sincerity in his voice surprised her. She had expected coldness, detachment, but she found instead a depth of emotion that resonated with her own grief. "Thank you," she murmured, her voice barely a whisper. An awkward silence fell between them, broken only by the gentle ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner. Kasha gestured toward the chair. "Please sit down." He sat, his movements deliberate and graceful. Kasha sat opposite him, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. She felt a strange mix of fear and fascination, of apprehension and something else. An attraction, a pull that she couldn't deny, a sense of connection that defied logic. "You said we have much to discuss," she said, her voice breaking the silence. "What did you mean by the call?" Reese leaned forward, his golden eyes locking onto hers. "The call of Holofong," he said, his voice low and intense. "The call of your blood, of your heritage. You have ignored it for too long, Kasha. And now, the forest is demanding an answer." His words sent a shiver down her spine. She remembered her grandmother's stories, the tales of a bond between certain families and the forest, a connection that spanned generations. She had always dismissed them as folklore, but now, facing Rhys, his words seemed to carry the weight of truth. I don't understand, she said, her voice trembling. What does the forest want from me? Rhys' gaze softened slightly. It wants you to remember, he said. To remember who you are, what you are. To embrace the power that flows through your veins. He paused, his eyes searching hers. To embrace your destiny as a whisperer, a protector of the balance. Kasha stared at him, her mind reeling. A whisper? Protector of the balance? What even were those? It sounded like something out of a fantastical story, not her quiet, ordinary life. He stood and walked towards the window, staring at the forest. The howling you heard the bells, it was a summons. A desperate one. He turned his intense gaze back at her. Something has awoken, Kasha. Something dark. And it threatens everything. He gestured for her to follow him. She felt a reluctance, but also that familiar magnetic pull, stronger than ever now. He looked at her, a new, strange urgency in his eyes. And you, Kasha Winter, he said, his voice dropping to a near whisper, are the only one who can stop it. He seemed to be waiting for her answer, for her choice. It would change everything, wouldn't it? Chapter 4. Echoes of a Forgotten Past. Rhys's words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken implications. You are the only one who can stop it. Kasha felt a surge of disbelief, followed by a wave of overwhelming fear. She, a simple baker, a widow still mourning her husband, the caretaker of a frail mother? How could she possibly be expected to stop anything, let alone something dark that threatened everything? I don't understand, she stammered, her voice barely a whisper. I'm just Kasha. I bake bread. I look after my mother. I'm not a hero. Rhys turned from the window, his golden eyes studying her with an intensity that made her skin prickle. He seemed to see past her doubts, past her self-deprecating words, to something deeper, something she herself hadn't recognized. You are more than you believe, Kasha, he said, his voice soft but firm. You are a descendant of the Winter line, one of the oldest families in Oakhaven, a family bound to Hollowfong Forest by an ancient pact. You are a whisper, whether you know it or not. He walked towards her, his movements fluid and graceful, stopping just a few feet away. The scent of pine and iron intensified, filling the small space between them. The whispers you've heard all your life, he continued, they are not just your imagination. They are the voices of the forest, the voices of your ancestors, guiding you, warning you. They are calling you to embrace your heritage, to awaken the power that lies dormant within you. Kasha shook her head, her mind struggling to grasp the implications of his words. But I've never felt any power. I'm just ordinary. Rhys smiled, a faint, fleeting expression that softened the harsh lines of his face. Ordinary is often a disguise, Kasha. And power can lie hidden, waiting for the right moment to reveal itself. He reached out, his hand hovering hesitantly over hers. Kasha instinctively recoiled, a surge of fear coursing through her. She wasn't used to being touched, not since Thomas died. The intimacy of the gesture, even though he hadn't actually touched her, felt overwhelming. Rhys withdrew his hand, a shadow of understanding in his eyes. I understand, he said softly. Trust is not easily given, especially in times like these. He turned and walked towards the fireplace, his gaze settling on the photograph of Kasha and Thomas. He studied it for a moment, his expression unreadable. Your husband, he said, his voice low and thoughtful. He knew, didn't he? Kasha's breath caught in her throat. Knew what? Rhys turned back to her, his golden eyes piercing. He knew about your heritage, about the forest, about the creatures that dwell within it. Kasha stared at him, her mind reeling. Thomas had always been a practical man, a man of the sea, not of the forest. He had dismissed her childhood stories of whispers as fanciful imaginings. Had he been hiding something from her? He never said anything, she said, her voice trembling. Rhys nodded slowly.
Perhaps he was protecting you, he said.
Or perhaps he was waiting for the right time to tell you. He paused, his gaze searching hers. Did he ever give you anything? A keepsake, a trinket, something unusual? Kasha's mind raced, trying to recall any such object. She remembered the small silver ring Thomas had given her on their wedding day, a simple band engraved with a delicate pattern of leaves. She had always worn it, a constant reminder of their love. A ring, she said, her voice barely a whisper. He gave me a silver ring. Rhys's eyes widened slightly. Show me, he said, his voice urgent. Kasha hesitated, then slipped the ring off her finger. It felt strangely cold without it, as if a part of her was missing. She held it out to Rhys, her hand trembling. He took the ring, his fingers brushing against hers, sending a jolt of unexpected warmth through her. He examined it closely, turning it over and over in his hands. The delicate leaf pattern seemed to glow faintly in the dim light. This is it, he said, his voice hushed with awe. This is the key. Kasha stared at him, her mind a whirlwind of confusion. The key to what? Rhys looked up at her, his golden eyes shining with a mixture of excitement and concern. The key to unlocking your power, he said. The key to understanding your destiny. The key to saving Oakhaven. He handed the ring back to her. Kasha slipped it back onto her finger, the familiar weight a small comfort in the midst of the growing storm of uncertainty. She looked at the ring, at the delicate leaf pattern, and suddenly, she remembered something. A fleeting memory, a whisper from her past. Her grandmother, sitting by the fire, telling her stories of the forest, of the winter family, of the silver ring that had been passed down through generations. The ring, she whispered, her voice trembling with the weight of forgotten memories. My grandmother, she said it was a protector. A link to the forest. Rhys nodded, his eyes confirming her words. It is more than that, Kasha, he said. It is a conduit, a channel for the forest's magic. It is a symbol of your bond, of your responsibility. He paused, his gaze searching hers. It is time for you to learn the truth, Kasha. The truth about your family, about your heritage, about the threat that faces us all. He looked towards the door, then back at Kasha, his eyes filled with a strange mixture of hope and apprehension. Will you come with me? He asked. Where to? Her mind supplied, but her voice was stuck. Chapter 5. The Unveiling of the Blood Moon. The question hung in the air, heavy with unspoken implications. Will you come with me? Kasha's heart pounded against her ribs, a frantic rhythm of fear and anticipation. Leaving the familiar safety of her cottage, venturing into the unknown with this enigmatic stranger was a terrifying prospect. But staying, ignoring the pull of the forest, the call of her blood, felt equally wrong. She looked at Rhys, his golden eyes searching hers, waiting for her answer. She saw a weariness in his face, a burden of responsibility that mirrored her own growing sense of unease. She also saw something else, a flicker of hope, a desperate plea for help. Her gaze drifted to the photograph on the mantelpiece, to Thomas's smiling face. What would he have done? Would he have embraced the unknown, or would he have clung to the familiar? She remembered his adventurous spirit, his love of the sea, his willingness to face any challenge. She also remembered his quiet strength, his unwavering support, his belief in her, even when she doubted herself. She thought of her mother, asleep in the next room, her frail body vulnerable and dependent. Leaving her felt unthinkable, a betrayal of her duty, of her love. But staying, ignoring the looming threat that Rhys spoke of, could put her mother and everyone in Oakhaven in even greater danger. My mother, she began, her voice trembling. I can't just leave her. Rhys nodded, his expression understanding. I know, he said. We will make arrangements. There are those in the village who can be trusted, who will look after her. He paused, his gaze searching hers. But time is of the essence, Kasha. The blood moon rises tonight, and with it, the power of the darkness will reach its peak. Kasha stared at him, her mind struggling to grasp the concept. The blood moon? It sounded like something out of a legend, a fantastical tale. But the urgency in Rhys's voice, the intensity of his golden eyes, told her that this was no fairy tale. What is the blood moon?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. Rhys walked towards the window, his gaze fixed on the forest, now bathed in the soft light of the rising sun. "It is a celestial event," he said, "a rare alignment of the sun, earth, and moon when the moon appears red in the sky. It is a time of heightened magic, a time when the veil between worlds is thin." He turned back to her, his expression grave. "And it is a time when the forces of darkness are at their strongest," he added. "The creature that has awoken, the one that summoned you with its howl, it draws its power from the blood moon. Tonight, it will attempt to break free from its ancient prison, to unleash its chaos upon the world." Kasha felt a chill run down her spine. The image of the howling creature, the fear it had instilled in her, flashed through her mind. She remembered the village bells, the frantic warning, the sudden, terrifying silence. "And you believe I can stop it?" she asked, her voice trembling with disbelief. Rhys nodded, his golden eyes unwavering. "You are the key, Kasha," he said. "You are the descendant of the one who imprisoned the creature long ago. You have the power, the blood, the connection to the forest. You are the only one who can stand against it." He paused, his gaze softening slightly. "I will help you," he said. "I will guide you, train you, protect you. But ultimately, the choice is yours. You must decide whether to embrace your destiny or to turn away and risk the consequences." Kasha looked at him, at the hope and determination in his eyes. She looked at the silver ring on her finger, the symbol of her heritage, of her connection to the forest. She thought of her mother, of Thomas, of the village she loved. She took a deep breath, her heart still pounding, but a new resolve hardening within her. She couldn't ignore the call any longer. She couldn't turn away from her responsibility. She had to try. "All right," she said, her voice steadier than she expected. "I'll go with you." Rhys's face relaxed, a flicker of relief in his golden eyes. "Thank you, Kasha," he said. "You have made the right choice." He turned and walked towards the door. "We must prepare," he said. "We have much to do before nightfall." Kasha followed him, her mind racing with 1,000 questions, 1,000 fears. But beneath the fear, there was a spark of something else, a sense of purpose, a feeling of awakening, a realization that her life was about to change forever. As they stepped outside, Kasha glanced back at her cottage, at the familiar walls that had sheltered her for so long. She felt a pang of sadness, a sense of leaving behind the life she knew. But she also felt a surge of anticipation, a sense of stepping into a larger world, a world of magic and danger, a world where she might finally discover who she truly was. The sun had risen fully now, casting long shadows across the village. The air was crisp and cool, the scent of pine and iron stronger than ever. As they walked towards the edge of the forest, Kasha noticed a small group of people gathered near the village square. They were watching her, their faces etched with a mixture of curiosity and concern. Rhys nodded towards them. "These are the ones who can be trusted," he said. "They will look after your mother, and they will help us in any way they can." Kasha recognized a few of the faces: Martha, the kindly old woman who ran the village general store; Samuel, the blacksmith, a strong and silent man who had been a friend of Thomas's; and Alara, a young woman with a knowledge of herbs and healing, who had often helped Kasha with her mother. They approached the group, their expressions wary but welcoming. Kasha explained the situation as best she could, her voice trembling slightly. She told them about the threat, about her need to go with Rhys, about her hope that they could protect her mother. Martha stepped forward, her eyes filled with concern. "We will take care of Eleanor, Kasha," she said. "Don't you worry about her. You go and do what you need to do." Samuel nodded in agreement, his hand resting on the hilt of a large axe that hung from his belt. "We will protect the village," he said, his voice gruff but reassuring. Alara smiled at Kasha, her eyes filled with a strange mixture of understanding and something else. "Excitement? We will be here for you, Kasha," she said. "And we will be ready to fight, if necessary." Kasha felt a surge of gratitude towards these people, these friends and neighbors who were willing to risk their own safety to help her. She knew she was asking a lot of them, but she also knew that they were the only ones she could trust. The blood moon was on the horizon, its crimson glow already seeming to taint the edges of the sky. Chapter 6. The Ancient Pact of Silverwood. With the promise of her mother's care secured, a weight lifted from Kasha's shoulders, though the gravity of the situation remained. Rhys led her away from the village, following a barely discernible path into the depths of Hollowfong Forest. The trees grew taller and closer together, their branches intertwining overhead, creating a canopy that filtered the sunlight, casting the forest floor in a perpetual twilight. The air grew cooler, heavier, imbued with the scent of damp earth, decaying leaves, and the ever-present aroma of pine and iron. The whispers returned, stronger now, a chorus of voices that seemed to surround her, guiding her, urging her onward. Rhys walked with a confident stride, his senses alert, his gaze constantly scanning the surrounding woods. He moved with a grace that belied his size, a natural ease that spoke of years spent navigating this wild terrain. He was a creature of the forest, as much a part of it as the trees and the creatures that dwelled within. Kasha struggled to keep up, her legs unused to the uneven ground, her lungs burning with the effort. She stumbled over roots and rocks, her breath coming in ragged gasps. But she pushed herself onward, driven by a sense of urgency, by a need to understand the task that lay ahead. "We're going to Silverwood," Rhys said, his voice low, breaking the silence. "It's a sacred place, a place of power, where the veil between worlds is thin. It's where the ancient pact was made, and it's where we can prepare for what's to come." Kasha's mind raced with questions. What pact? She asked, her voice breathless. What happened at Silverwood? Rhys glanced back at her, his golden eyes softening slightly. "The story is long," he said, "and complex. But I will tell you what you need to know." He began to speak, his voice a low murmur that blended with the whispers of the forest. He told her of a time long ago, when the world was younger, when magic was more prevalent, when humans and other beings lived in a fragile balance. He spoke of the Winter family, her ancestors, who had been chosen as guardians of Hollowfong Forest, entrusted with protecting the balance between the human world and the realm of the Fae, a realm of magic and creatures beyond human comprehension. The Fae were not inherently evil, Rhys explained, but they were different. Their power was immense, their motives often inscrutable. They could be benevolent, but they could also be cruel, capricious, dangerous. He told her of a creature of immense power, a being of shadow and darkness that had emerged from the Fae realm, threatening to destroy the balance, to unleash chaos upon the world. This creature, known as the Shadow Beast, had wreaked havoc upon the land, its power growing with each passing day. The Winters, along with other powerful families, banded together to fight the Shadow Beast, Rhys continued. They used their magic, their knowledge of the forest, their connection to the land, to drive it back, to imprison it within a sacred grove, Silverwood. He paused, his gaze fixed on a distant point in the forest. But they knew that the imprisonment was not permanent, he said. They knew that the Shadow Beast would eventually try to break free. So they created a pact, a binding agreement between the human world and the Fae, to ensure that the creature would remain imprisoned forever. And what was the pact? Kasha asked, her voice hushed with awe. Rhys stopped, turning to face her. His golden eyes were intense, unwavering. The pact required a sacrifice, he said. A blood sacrifice, to bind the Shadow Beast to its prison. And it required a guardian, a descendant of the Winter line, to maintain the seal, to renew the sacrifice every generation at the time of the blood moon. Kasha's heart pounded against her ribs. The pieces of the puzzle were beginning to fall into place. The whispers, the ring, her grandmother's stories, Rhys's words had all pointed to a single, terrifying conclusion. "And I am that guardian?" she asked, her voice trembling. Rhys nodded, his expression grave. "You are," he said. "The last of the Winter line, the one who must renew the pact, the one who must prevent the Shadow Beast from escaping." Kasha felt a wave of dizziness, of disbelief. She, a simple baker, a widow, A caretaker, she was supposed to perform a blood sacrifice, to maintain an ancient pact, to save the world from a creature of darkness? But how? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. I don't know anything about magic, about sacrifices. Rhys placed a hand on her arm, his touch surprisingly gentle. The warmth of his hand seeped through her sleeve, a small comfort in the midst of her overwhelming fear. I will teach you, he said. I will show you what you need to know. You are not alone, Kasha. We will face this together. He squeezed her arm reassuringly and turned to resume their trek through the forest. The deepening gloom of the approaching night seemed somehow fitting. We must reach Silverwood before the blood moon rises, he said. The urgency in his voice spurred Kasha to push through her exhaustion and match his pace. The whispers, she realized, were leading her home. Chapter 7. A Dance with Shadows and Secrets. The journey to Silverwood was arduous, a test of Kasha's physical and emotional endurance. Rhys pushed her relentlessly, urging her onward, forcing her to confront her fears and her doubts. He taught her about the forest, about its hidden pathways, its secret places, its dangers, and its wonders. He showed her how to listen to the whispers, how to interpret their meaning, how to draw strength from the land. He also began to teach her about magic, about the power that flowed through her veins, the power that had been dormant for so long. He explained that her connection to the forest, her ability to hear the whispers, was a manifestation of this power, a gift passed down through generations of winters. Magic is not about waving a wand and casting spells, he said, as they rested beside a small stream, the sound of rushing water a soothing balm to Kasha's aching muscles. It's about connection, about understanding, about intention. It's about drawing upon the energy of the natural world and shaping it to your will. He showed her how to feel the energy of the forest, how to sense the pulse of life that flowed through the trees, the earth, the water. He taught her how to focus her mind, how to visualize her desires, how to channel her emotions into a tangible force. It was difficult, frustrating, often overwhelming. Kasha struggled to control the power that surged within her, the unfamiliar sensations that made her skin tingle, her heart race. She made mistakes. She stumbled. She doubted herself at every turn. But Rhys was patient, encouraging, always there to guide her, to correct her, to push her to try again. He challenged her, tested her, forced her to confront her limitations. He also showed her kindness, compassion, a deep understanding of her fears and her vulnerabilities. As they journeyed deeper into the forest, Kasha began to notice subtle changes in Rhys. He became more alert, more guarded, his senses constantly scanning the surroundings. He spoke less, his silences filled with a tension that made Kasha's own anxiety grow. "What is it?" she asked one evening as they sat beside a small fire, the flames casting flickering shadows on the surrounding trees. "What are you sensing?" Rhys looked at her, his golden eyes reflecting the firelight. "The darkness is growing stronger," he said, his voice low. "The shadow beast is stirring. It knows we are coming." Kasha felt a chill run down her spine. She remembered the howling, the fear it had instilled in her, the sense of overwhelming power. "Can it hurt us?" Rhys nodded. "It can," he said. "It can manipulate the forest, create illusions, summon creatures of shadow. It will try to stop us from reaching Silverwood." He paused, his gaze searching hers. "But we will be ready," he added. "We will face it together." As they continued their journey, the forest became more menacing, the shadows deeper, the whispers more urgent. Strange sounds echoed through the trees, rustling leaves, snapping twigs, distant howls. Illusions flickered at the edges of Kasha's vision, fleeting shapes, distorted faces, whispers of her name. Rhys taught her how to distinguish between reality and illusion, how to resist the shadow beast's attempts to manipulate her mind. He showed her how to use her own power to create shields, to deflect attacks, to fight back. One evening, as they were nearing Silverwood, they were attacked by a pack of shadow wolves, creatures of darkness, their eyes glowing with an unnatural red light, their fangs bared in a menacing snarl. Kasha froze, her heart pounding with terror. She had never faced anything like this before, never imagined that such creatures could exist. Reese stepped in front of her, his body a shield, his golden eyes blazing with defiance. He drew a long, silver knife from his belt, the blade gleaming in the dim light. "Stay behind me, Kasha," he said, his voice calm but firm. "And use your power. Focus your mind. Visualize a shield of light and push it outwards." Kasha struggled to obey, her mind racing, her body trembling. She closed her eyes, picturing a bright, white light surrounding her and Reese, a barrier against the darkness. She focused all her energy, all her will, into creating that shield. She felt a surge of power, a tingling sensation that spread through her body. She opened her eyes and saw a faint, shimmering glow surrounding them, a barrier that pushed back against the encroaching shadows. The shadow wolves attacked, their claws and fangs tearing at the shield, their howls echoing through the forest. Reese fought with a ferocity Kasha had never seen before, his movements swift and deadly, his silver knife flashing in the dim light. Kasha maintained the shield, her body straining with the effort, her mind focused on holding back the darkness. She felt the shadow beast's power pressing against her, trying to break through her defenses, trying to overwhelm her with fear. But she held on, drawing strength from Reese, from the forest, from the memory of her ancestors. She would not let the darkness win. She would not let the shadow beast escape. The battle raged, a dance of shadows and light, of fear and determination. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, the shadow wolves retreated, their forms dissolving into the darkness, their howls fading into the night. Kasha collapsed, her body exhausted, her mind drained. Reese knelt beside her, his hand on her shoulder, his golden eyes filled with concern. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice heavy with the recent fight. Kasha nodded, her breath coming in ragged gasps. I think so." Reese helped her to her feet, his touch surprisingly gentle. "You did well, Kasha," he said. "You are stronger than you know." He looked deep in her eyes, his own full of a complicated emotion. "But the true test," he said, "is yet to come." They still hadn't reached Silverwood, and the moon, she noticed, was beginning its bloody ascent. Chapter 8. The first touch of the soul bond. The encounter with the shadow wolves had left Kasha shaken, but it had also ignited a spark of confidence within her. She had faced her fear, she had used her power, and she had survived. The experience had forged a stronger bond between her and Reese, a deeper understanding born of shared danger and mutual reliance. They continued their journey, their pace quickened by the approaching blood moon. The forest grew denser, the trees taller, the air heavier with magic. The whispers intensified, a constant chorus that seemed to vibrate within Kasha's very bones. They finally reached Silverwood, a clearing bathed in an ethereal, silvery light, even though the moon had not yet fully risen. The air here was different, charged with an energy that made Kasha's skin tingle, her hair stand on end. In the center of the clearing stood a circle of ancient stones, their surfaces covered in intricate carvings, their purpose both mysterious and awe-inspiring. "This is it," Reese said, his voice hushed with reverence. "This is where the pact was made. This is where we must renew it." He led her to the center of the circle, his hand resting lightly on her back, a guiding presence that sent a shiver of warmth through her. The stones seemed to pulse with a faint, inner light, their carvings glowing with an otherworldly energy. Reese began to explain the ritual, his voice low and serious. He told her that she must draw upon the power of the forest, channel it through the silver ring, and offer a small amount of her own blood, a symbolic renewal of the ancient sacrifice. "The blood is not the important part," he emphasized. "It's the intention, the willingness to sacrifice, the commitment to maintaining the balance. The blood is merely a symbol, a focus for your power." He showed her the specific carvings on the stones, the symbols that represented the elements, the Fae, the binding agreement. He taught her the ancient words, the incantations that must be spoken to activate the magic. Kasha listened intently, her mind absorbing every detail, her heart pounding with a mixture of fear and determination. She knew that this was the moment she had been preparing for, the culmination of her journey, the test of her courage and her power. As the blood moon began to rise, casting a crimson glow over the forest, Rhys stepped back, his gaze fixed on Kasha. "It is time," he said. "You must do this alone." Kasha nodded, her throat dry, her hands trembling. She stepped into the center of the circle, the silver ring on her finger feeling heavy, charged with an energy that made her skin prickle. She closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and began to speak the ancient words, her voice echoing through the clearing, blending with the whispers of the forest. She felt the power surge within her, a torrent of energy that flowed through her veins, making her body tremble. She opened her eyes and saw the stones glowing brighter, the carvings pulsing with a vibrant, red light. She felt the presence of the forest, the ancient magic, the spirits of her ancestors, all gathering around her, supporting her, guiding her. She reached for the small, silver dagger that Rhys had given her, its blade gleaming in the blood moon's light. She hesitated for a moment, her fear rising, but then she steeled her resolve. She was a winter, a guardian of Hollowfong, a whisperer. She would not fail. She pricked her finger, a tiny drop of blood welling up, crimson against her pale skin. She touched the blood to the central stone, the symbol of the pact, and felt a jolt of energy pass through her, a connection to something ancient and powerful. As the blood touched the stone, a wave of energy surged outwards, engulfing the clearing, shaking the ground, making the trees sway. Kasha felt a searing pain in her chest, a burning sensation that spread through her body. She gasped, her knees buckling, her vision blurring. Rhys rushed to her side, catching her before she fell. He held her close, his arms strong and supportive, his golden eyes filled with concern.
"Kasha,"
he cried, his voice laced with alarm. "What's happening?" Kasha struggled to speak, her body racked with pain, her mind reeling. "I don't know," she gasped. "It hurts." Rhys held her tighter, his gaze searching hers. He saw something there, a flicker of something he hadn't seen before, a spark of connection, a recognition. He felt it too, a jolt of energy, a surge of warmth, a sense of belonging. He felt a connection to Kasha, a bond that went beyond the physical, beyond the magical, a link between their souls. He realized what was happening. The ritual, the blood sacrifice, the surge of power, it had triggered something unexpected, something ancient and powerful. It had awakened the soul bond, the legendary connection between the Winter Guardians and their chosen protectors. He had heard stories of the soul bond, tales of a connection so deep, so profound, that it transcended life and death. He had always dismissed them as myths, legends, but now, holding Kasha in his arms, feeling the power that flowed between them, he knew it was real. The pain began to subside, replaced by a warmth, a sense of peace, a feeling of completeness that Kasha had never experienced before. She looked up at Rhys, her eyes wide with wonder. What was that?" she whispered. Rhys smiled, a genuine, heartfelt smile that lit up his face, transforming his features from harsh and weary to something beautiful and radiant. "It's the soul bond, Kasha," he said, his voice soft and tender. "It's a connection between us, a link between our hearts, our minds, our souls." He gently brushed a strand of hair from her face, his fingers lingering on her cheek. "It means," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "that we are meant to be together, that we are destined to face this darkness together." He held her, knowing that the bond had saved them and sealed their fates. The blood moon, for a moment, seemed to shine a little less menacingly. Chapter 9. The Gathering Storm of Betrayal. The revelation of the soul bond left Kasha and Rhys reeling, grappling with the implications of this unexpected connection. The pain had subsided, replaced by an undeniable warmth, a sense of belonging, a feeling of completeness that neither of them had ever experienced before. But the joy of this discovery was tempered by the looming threat of the shadow beast, the knowledge that the blood moon was at its peak, its power fueling the creature's imminent escape. They knew they had to act quickly, to complete the ritual, to reinforce the seal that held the shadow beast imprisoned. But the soul bond had changed everything, altering the dynamics of their relationship, adding a layer of complexity and intensity that they couldn't ignore. "We must finish the ritual," Rhys said, his voice still husky with emotion, his golden eyes locked onto Kasha's. "But we need to understand this bond, to control it before it controls us." Kasha nodded, her heart still pounding, her mind struggling to process the overwhelming emotions that surged within her. She felt drawn to Rhys, connected to him in a way she had never felt connected to anyone, not even Thomas. It was a terrifying and exhilarating feeling, a mixture of fear and desire, of uncertainty and inevitability. They returned to the circle of stones, the silver ring on Kasha's finger pulsing with a warm, steady light, a tangible manifestation of the soul bond. Rhys guided her through the remaining steps of the ritual, his voice calm and reassuring, his touch gentle and supportive. Kasha spoke the ancient words, her voice stronger now, infused with the power of the bond, the energy of the forest. She felt the connection to Rhys deepen, their minds merging, their thoughts intertwining, their emotions flowing together. They completed the ritual, reinforcing the seal, pushing back the shadow beast's power, securing its prison for another generation. A wave of exhaustion washed over Kasha, leaving her weak and drained, but also filled with a sense of accomplishment, of relief. They stood together, hand in hand, in the center of the circle, the blood moon beginning to wane, its crimson glow fading, replaced by the soft, silver light of the returning moon. They had succeeded, they had faced the darkness, and they had won. But there were new, complicated feelings to manage. But as the immediate danger subsided, a new threat emerged, one they hadn't anticipated. A group of figures stepped out of the shadows, their faces hidden by hoods, their bodies clad in dark leather, their weapons drawn. Well, a voice said, cold and menacing. "It seems we have arrived just in time." Rhys recognized the voice, his body tensing, his golden eyes narrowing. "Eldrin," he said, his voice laced with anger and betrayal. Eldrin, the leader of the group, stepped forward, his hood falling back, revealing a face that was both familiar and shockingly different. It was Samuel, the blacksmith, the man who had been Thomas's friend, the man who had promised to protect Kasha's mother. Kasha gasped, her hand flying to her mouth, her mind reeling with disbelief. "Samuel, but why?" Samuel Eldrin smiled, a cruel, twisted smile that sent a chill down Kasha's spine.
"Why?" he said.
"Because power is everything, my dear. And the Shadow Beast offers more power than any of you can imagine." He gestured towards the circle of stones. "You have done well, Kasha," he said. "You have renewed the seal, making it easier for us to break it. The Shadow Beast will reward us handsomely for our service." Rhys stepped in front of Kasha, his body a shield, his golden eyes blazing with fury. "You betrayed us," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "You betrayed your village, your friends, your oaths." Eldrin laughed, a harsh, mocking sound. "Oaths?" he said. "Friendship? These are meaningless words. Power is the only thing that matters. And soon, the Shadow Beast will rule this world, and we will rule with it." He raised his hand, signaling his followers. "Kill them," he ordered. "And bring me the ring." The hooded figures attacked, their weapons flashing in the dim light. Rhys fought with the ferocity of a cornered wolf, his movements swift and deadly, his silver knife deflecting blows, drawing blood. But they were outnumbered, surrounded by enemies who were skilled and determined. Kasha, despite her exhaustion, drew upon the power of the soul bond, channeling her fear and anger into a protective shield, deflecting attacks, pushing back her assailants. She fought with a strength she didn't know she possessed, driven by a fierce determination to protect Rhys, to protect her village, to protect the world from the Shadow Beast. The battle raged, a chaotic dance of shadows and steel, of magic and desperation. Kasha and Rhys fought back to back, their movements synchronized, their powers intertwined, their souls connected. They were a formidable force, a beacon of light against the encroaching darkness. But Eldrin was a cunning and ruthless opponent. He had planned this betrayal carefully, anticipating their every move, exploiting their weaknesses. He had known about the soul bond. He had known about Kasha's power. He had known about the ritual.
He was in league with something.
As the fight wore, Kasha looked at Rhys, noticing his face was ashen. He was faltering. Eldrin raised his weapon, and Kasha knew that he would miss. Betrayal cut sharper than any blade. Chapter 10. The Price of Forbidden Love. Kasha's heart leaped into her throat as she saw Eldrin raise his weapon, a wickedly curved blade that glinted in the fading blood moon's light. She knew, with a sickening certainty, that Rhys wouldn't be able to deflect the blow. He was weakened, exhausted from the ritual and the fight, his movements sluggish, his defenses down. Without thinking, driven by instinct and the overwhelming power of the soul bond, Kasha threw herself in front of Rhys, shielding his body with her own. She felt a searing pain as Eldrin's blade pierced her side, a burning agony that spread through her body, stealing her breath, making her vision blur. "Kasha!" Rhys roared, his voice filled with anguish and rage. He caught her as she stumbled, his arms wrapping around her, holding her close. He saw the blood staining her clothes, spreading rapidly, a crimson stain against the pale fabric. Eldrin sneered, his eyes glittering with triumph. "Foolish girl," he said. "You sacrificed yourself for nothing. The shadow beast will still be freed, and you will both die." But Rhys ignored him, his focus entirely on Kasha. He pressed his hand against her wound, trying to stem the flow of blood, his golden eyes filled with a mixture of terror and love. It was a love born of the soul bond, a connection that transcended the physical, a feeling so profound, so intense, that it overwhelmed him. "Kasha, stay with me," he pleaded, his voice choked with emotion.
"Don't leave me. Please."
Kasha looked up at him, her eyes filled with pain, but also with a strange serenity. She had made her choice. She had protected the man she was bound to, the man she loved. It was a forbidden love, a dangerous love, but it was real, it was powerful, it was everything. "Rhys," she whispered, her voice weak, her breath coming in ragged gasps. I love you." The words, spoken so softly, so faintly, struck Rhys with the force of a physical blow. He had known, on some level, that the soul bond had created a connection of love between them, but to hear her say it, to see the truth in her eyes, was overwhelming. "I love you too, Kasha," he said, his voice thick with emotion, tears streaming down his face. "I love you more than anything." He held her close, cradling her in his arms, his body shaking with grief and rage. He knew she was dying. He could feel her life force ebbing away, her connection to the soul bond weakening. But he wouldn't give up. He wouldn't let her die. He would use every ounce of his power, every bit of his knowledge, to save her. He closed his eyes, focusing his mind, drawing upon the power of the forest, the energy of the soul bond. He channeled all his love, all his will, into a desperate plea, a prayer to the ancient spirits, to the guardians of Holofong, to any power that could help him. He felt a surge of energy, a warmth that spread through his body, filling him with a renewed sense of hope. He opened his eyes and saw a faint, golden glow surrounding Kasha's wound, a healing light that seemed to push back the darkness. The bleeding slowed, then stopped. Kasha's breathing became easier. Her eyes fluttered open, her gaze focusing on Rhys. "Rhys," she whispered, her voice stronger now. What happened?" Rhys smiled, tears of relief streaming down his face. "You're alive," he said. "You're going to be all right." He helped her to sit up, his arms supporting her, his touch gentle and reassuring. Kasha felt weak, drained, but the pain was gone, replaced by a warmth, a sense of healing. But their reprieve was short-lived. Eldrin, enraged by their survival, attacked again, his followers joining him, their weapons raised, their faces filled with hatred. Rhys stood, his body shielding Kasha, his golden eyes blazing with defiance. He was weakened, injured, but he would not surrender. He would fight to the death to protect Kasha, to protect the world from the shadow beast. As Eldrin and his forces advanced, a sudden, powerful howl echoed through the forest, a sound that shook the ground, made the trees tremble. It was not the howl of the shadow beast, but something else, something ancient and wild and protective. From the shadows of the forest, a pack of wolves emerged, their eyes glowing with an unnatural, golden light, their fangs bared in a menacing snarl. But these were not shadow wolves, creatures of darkness. These were creatures of the forest, guardians of Holofong, answering the call of the soul bond, coming to the aid of their chosen ones. The wolves attacked Eldrin and his followers, their movements swift and deadly, their fangs tearing flesh, their howls filling the night. The battle was fierce, brutal, but the wolves were relentless, driven by an ancient instinct, a primal loyalty to the guardians of the forest. Eldrin, overwhelmed by the sudden attack, fought desperately, his cruelty matched only by his fear. But he was no match for the combined power of the wolves and Rhys, who, fueled by his love for Kasha and the strength of the soul bond, fought with a renewed ferocity. Finally, with a desperate cry, Eldrin fell, his body torn and broken, his betrayal ending in a bloody demise. His followers, seeing their leader defeated, scattered, fleeing into the darkness, their dreams of power shattered. The wolves, their task completed, retreated back into the forest, their golden eyes lingering on Rhys and Kasha for a moment, a silent acknowledgement of their bond, their courage, their victory. Rhys turned to Kasha, his face etched with exhaustion and relief, but also with a deep, abiding love. He knelt beside her, taking her hand in his touch gentle and reassuring. The night wasn't over. It couldn't be, not with the wound Eldrin left and the words she had spoken. Chapter 11. The Unraveling of Kasha's Heart. The aftermath of the battle left a heavy silence hanging over Silverwood. The crimson glow of the blood moon had completely faded, leaving the clearing bathed in the soft, silver light of the ordinary moon. The scent of blood and pine mingled in the air, a stark reminder of the violence that had transpired. Kasha sat leaning against one of the ancient stones, Rhys's strong arms supporting her. The wound in her side, though miraculously healed, still ached with a dull, throbbing pain. But the physical pain was nothing compared to the emotional turmoil that raged within her. She had confessed her love to Rhys, a love born of the soul bond, a connection that defied logic, that transcended the boundaries of her previous life. It was a love that was both exhilarating and terrifying, a feeling so intense, so overwhelming, that it threatened to consume her. And Rhys had reciprocated, his words echoing in her mind, "I love you too, Kasha. I love you more than anything." His declaration had filled her with a joy she had never thought possible, a sense of belonging, of completeness. But it also filled her with guilt, with doubt, with a profound sense of unease. She thought of Thomas, her husband, the man she had loved for so many years, the man who had shared her life, her dreams, her hopes. The memory of his smiling face, his gentle touch, his unwavering support, filled her with a deep, abiding sadness. How could she reconcile her love for Rhys with the love she still felt for Thomas? Was it a betrayal, a dishonoring of his memory? "Rhys," she began, her voice trembling, her gaze fixed on the ground, unable to meet his eyes. I don't know what to do. I feel lost." Rhys tightened his arm around her, his touch gentle and reassuring. "I know," he said, his voice soft and understanding. "It's a lot to process. The soul bond, it changes everything." He paused, his gaze searching hers. "But it doesn't erase the past, Kasha," he added. "It doesn't invalidate your love for Thomas. It simply adds another layer, another dimension, to your heart." Kasha looked up at him, her eyes filled with confusion and pain. "But how can I love two men?" she asked. "How can I reconcile these feelings? It feels wrong." Rhys sighed, his golden eyes filled with a mixture of sadness and understanding. "Love is not a finite resource, Kasha," he said. "It's not something that can be measured or divided. It's infinite, expansive, capable of encompassing many different forms, many different people. He paused, his gaze holding hers. Your love for Thomas was real, he said. It was beautiful. It was a part of who you are. And it will always be a part of you. But your love for me, it's different. It's born of a different connection, a different destiny. It doesn't diminish your love for Thomas. It simply complements it. Kasia struggled to grasp his words, her mind reeling with conflicting emotions. She wanted to believe him. She wanted to embrace this new love, this new connection, but the guilt, the doubt, the fear held her back. I need time, she said, her voice barely a whisper. Time to understand, to process, to heal. Rhys nodded, his expression compassionate. I know, he said, and I will give you all the time you need. I will be here for you, Kasia, always. No matter what. He leaned in and gently kissed her forehead, his touch tender and reassuring. It was a gesture of comfort, of support, not of passion. He understood that she needed space, that she needed time to unravel the tangled threads of her heart. They sat in silence for a long while, the only sound the gentle rustling of the leaves, the distant hooting of an owl. The forest seemed to hold its breath, waiting, watching, as Kasia grappled with the complexities of her emotions. Finally, Rhys spoke, his voice low and serious. We need to return to Oakhaven, he said. We need to check on your mother, to see if Eldrin's betrayal has caused any further damage. Kasia nodded, her mind still reeling, but a sense of urgency pushing her forward. She had to be strong. She had to face the challenges that lay ahead, not just for herself, but for her mother, for her village, for the world. They rose, Rhys helping her to her feet, his touch careful and considerate. Kasia felt weak, drained, both physically and emotionally, but she drew strength from Rhys, from the soul bond that connected them, from the knowledge that she was not alone. As they walked back towards Oakhaven, the first rays of dawn breaking through the trees, Kasia felt a flicker of hope, a glimmer of light amidst the darkness. She didn't know what the future held. She didn't know how she would reconcile her conflicting emotions, but she knew one thing for sure. She would face it with courage, with determination, and with the unwavering support of the man she was bound to, the man she loved. She also knew, deep down, that Eldrin's betrayal had been orchestrated by a force far greater than a simple blacksmith consumed by greed. The mention of something that was working with him, that something was still out there, and she, as a whisper, needed to find out what. The thought settled in her stomach like a stone. Chapter 12. The Hunter's Relentless Pursuit. The return to Oakhaven was fraught with tension. The village, usually bustling with early morning activity, was eerily quiet, the houses shuttered, the streets deserted. The scent of smoke hung heavy in the air, a grim reminder of Eldrin's treachery. Kasia's heart pounded with dread as they approached her cottage. She feared the worst, imagining her mother caught in the crossfire of Eldrin's betrayal, her frail body unable to withstand the violence. They found the cottage untouched, the door still locked, the windows intact. But inside, a scene of chaos awaited them. Furniture was overturned, drawers were pulled out, their contents scattered across the floor. The air was thick with the scent of fear and something else, something acrid and unfamiliar. Eleanor was gone. Kasia's legs gave way, and she would have collapsed if Rhys hadn't caught her, his strong arms holding her upright. "Mother!" she cried, her voice a desperate wail that echoed through the empty cottage. Rhys searched the cottage, his senses alert, his golden eyes scanning every corner, every shadow. He found no sign of Eleanor, no trace of a struggle, no indication of where she might have been taken. But he did find something else, a small, black feather, lying on the floor near Eleanor's bed. It was not the feather of any bird he recognized, its texture strange, its color unnatural, a deep, iridescent black that seemed to absorb the light. He picked it up, his fingers tingling with a sense of unease. He recognized the scent now, the acrid odor that permeated the cottage. It was the scent of shadow magic, the signature of the creature that had aided Eldrin, the force behind his betrayal. They took her, he said, his voice grim, his golden eyes filled with a mixture of anger and concern. The hunters. They took your mother. Kasia stared at him, her mind reeling with disbelief and terror. Hunters? She whispered.
Who are they?
Why would they take her? Reese explained that the Hunters were a secret organization, a group of fanatics who believed that the Shadow Beast was a god, a being of immense power that should be worshipped, not imprisoned. They had been working with Eldrin, supplying him with weapons and magic, manipulating him to further their own twisted agenda. They believe that the Blood Moon ritual weakened the seal, Reese said. They believe that by sacrificing a Whisperer, a descendant of the Winter Line, they can break the seal completely and unleash the Shadow Beast upon the world. Kasia's blood ran cold. Her mother, frail and innocent, was to be used as a sacrifice, a pawn in a deadly game. She felt a surge of rage, a fierce determination to protect her mother, to save her from the clutches of these fanatics. We have to find her, she said, her voice trembling with emotion, but also with a newfound resolve. We have to stop them. Reese nodded, his expression grim.
We will, he said.
But we need to be careful. The Hunters are ruthless, cunning, and they have the advantage of surprise. He examined the black feather again, his mind racing, trying to decipher its meaning, to glean any clue that might lead them to Eleanor. He recognized the magic that infused the feather, the signature of a particular type of shadow creature, a being known as a shade. The shades are trackers, he explained. They can follow a scent across vast distances, through any terrain. They are relentless, tireless, and they are loyal to the Hunters. He paused, his gaze meeting Kasia's. This feather, it's a message, he said. A warning. They want us to know that they have her. They want us to follow them. Kasia felt a surge of fear, but also a flicker of hope. If the Hunters wanted them to follow, it meant that her mother was still alive. It meant that they had a chance to save her. Then we'll follow, she said, her voice firm, her determination unwavering. We'll follow them to the ends of the earth, if we have to. Reese nodded, his golden eyes filled with admiration and love. He knew that the journey ahead would be dangerous, that they would face unimaginable challenges, but he also knew that he would do anything to protect Kasia, to save her mother, to fulfill their destiny. He put his arm around and squeezed her shoulders gently. But first, he said, leading her to a small, untouched chair. We will need a plan. He began to lay out his ideas, speaking quickly. Kasia needed to know, needed to be informed, because she was about to make a very difficult choice. And he knew it. The Hunters would lead them on a chase, drawing them away from Oakhaven, away from any potential help, into a trap. They had to be prepared, they had to be one step ahead, and they had to be willing to make sacrifices. The stone settled deeper in her stomach. The silence felt heavier, more oppressive than before. Chapter 13. The Sanctuary of Whispering Pines. Reese's plan was audacious, bordering on reckless, but Kasia saw the desperate necessity in it. The Hunters, with their shade trackers and their knowledge of shadow magic, held a significant advantage. A direct pursuit would lead them into a carefully laid trap, likely costing them Eleanor's life and their own. We need to divide their forces, Reese explained, his voice low and urgent, his golden eyes scanning the forest outside the cottage window. We need to give them a false trail, something to distract them, while we find a way to track Eleanor without relying on the shade scent. He proposed using a powerful illusion, a phantom scent trail that would mimic Kasia's, drawing the Hunters away from Oakhaven, deeper into the wilderness. It was a risky maneuver, requiring immense magical energy and precise control, but it was their best chance to buy time and create an opportunity to rescue Eleanor. But the illusion, it will require a significant portion of my power, Kasia said, her voice filled with concern. I'm still weak from the ritual, from the wound. Reese nodded, his expression understanding. I know, he said. And that's why we need to find a place of power, a place where you can draw upon the forest's energy to amplify your own. He spoke of Whispering Pines, a secluded grove hidden deep within Hollowfong Forest, a place known only to a select few, a sanctuary where the veil between worlds was particularly thin. It was a place of immense natural magic, a place where Kasha could replenish her strength and create the illusion with greater ease and potency. But reaching Whispering Pines was a perilous undertaking. The grove was guarded by ancient spirits, protective entities that tested the worthiness of those who sought to enter. It was a place of trials, of challenges, a place where Kasha would have to confront her deepest fears and prove her commitment to protecting the balance. They left the cottage under the cover of the pre-dawn gloom, leaving behind a false trail of Kasha's scent, a carefully crafted illusion designed to mislead the hunters. They moved swiftly and silently, Rhys leading the way, his senses alert, his gaze constantly scanning the surroundings. The journey to Whispering Pines was a test of Kasha's resilience, both physical and emotional. She was still recovering from her injuries, her body aching, her mind reeling from the events of the past few days. The guilt over her mother's capture weighed heavily on her, fueling her determination, but also threatening to overwhelm her with despair. Rhys supported her, encouraged her, his presence a constant source of strength and comfort. He shared his knowledge of the forest, teaching her how to navigate the treacherous terrain, how to identify edible plants, how to find sources of water. He also continued to instruct her in the ways of magic, helping her to refine her control, to harness the power of the soul bond, to prepare for the challenges that lay ahead. As they neared Whispering Pines, the air grew thick with magic, the trees taller and more ancient, the whispers louder and more insistent. Kasha felt a sense of awe and trepidation, a feeling of stepping into a realm beyond human comprehension. They reached the entrance to the grove, a narrow passage between two towering pine trees, their branches intertwined overhead, forming a natural archway. The air shimmered with an ethereal light, a visible manifestation of the potent magic that permeated the area. Rhys stopped, his hand resting lightly on Kasha's arm. "This is it," he said, his voice hushed with reverence. "Whispering Pines. Be prepared, Kasha. The spirits will test you. They will challenge your courage, your resolve, your worthiness." Kasha nodded, her heart pounding with a mixture of fear and anticipation. She knew that this was a crucial step, a turning point in her journey. She had to prove herself, not just to the spirits, but to herself, to Rhys, to the memory of her ancestors. They stepped through the archway, entering the grove. The air inside was cool and still, the silence profound, broken only by the gentle rustling of leaves, the distant murmur of a hidden stream. The trees here were immense, their trunks wider than any Kasha had ever seen, their branches reaching towards the sky like supplicating arms. As they walked deeper into the grove, Kasha felt a presence, a watchful gaze, a sense of being evaluated, judged. She saw fleeting shapes in the shadows, heard whispers in the wind, felt the touch of unseen hands. The spirits began to test her, presenting her with illusions, with challenges, with temptations. She was confronted with visions of her past, her regrets, her failures. She was tempted with promises of power, of knowledge, of escape from her responsibilities. But Kasha held firm, drawing strength from the soul bond, from her love for Rhys, from her determination to save her mother. She resisted the temptations, she overcame the challenges, she proved her worthiness. Finally, she reached the heart of the grove, a small clearing bathed in a soft, golden light. In the center stood a single, ancient pine tree, its trunk gnarled and twisted, its branches reaching towards the heavens like the arms of a wise old woman. Kasha felt a surge of power, a connection to the forest, to the earth, to the ancient magic that permeated this sacred place. She knew that she had been accepted, that she had passed the test. She could feel it, like a warm embrace. She closed her eyes, opened her mind, and began to draw upon the energy of Whispering Pines, replenishing her strength, amplifying her power, preparing for the task that lay ahead. She was getting ready to use the illusion to buy them some time, to make good on her promise to save her mother. It was all she could think of. Chapter 14. The Revelation of the Lycan Curse. As Kasha drew upon the potent energies of Whispering Pines, Replenishing her strength and preparing for the creation of the illusion, Rhys stood guard, his senses alert, his golden eyes scanning the surrounding forest. He knew that the hunters would not be easily fooled, that they would eventually realize the deception and resume their pursuit. While Kasha focused on her task, Rhys's mind drifted back to the events of the past few days, to the revelations, the betrayals, the unexpected emergence of the soul bond. He thought about Eldrin, about his cruelty and his ambition, about the mysterious force that had been manipulating him. He also thought about Kasha, about her courage, her resilience, her unwavering determination to save her mother. He felt a profound sense of love for her, a connection that went beyond the physical, beyond the magical, a bond that had been forged in the crucible of danger and adversity. As he pondered, he noticed a subtle change in the air, a shift in the energy of the forest. The whispers intensified, becoming more urgent, more insistent. He felt a prickling sensation on his skin, a sense of unease, a premonition of danger. He looked around, his gaze searching the shadows, trying to identify the source of the disturbance. He saw nothing, heard nothing, but the feeling of unease persisted, growing stronger with each passing moment. Suddenly, he felt a sharp pain in his chest, a burning sensation that spread through his body, making him gasp, his knees buckling. He stumbled, his hand clutching his chest, his vision blurring. He recognized the feeling, the agonizing pain, the uncontrollable transformation. It was the curse, the ancient affliction that had plagued his family for generations, the curse that had made him an outcast, a creature of the shadows. It was the Lycan curse, the curse of the werewolf. He had managed to control it for years, suppressing the beast within, using ancient rituals, herbal remedies, and sheer willpower to keep the transformation at bay. But the stress of the past few days, the emotional turmoil, the magical exertion, had weakened his defenses, triggering the curse, unleashing the wolf within. He looked at Kasha, her eyes still closed, her body bathed in the golden light of whispering pines, her mind focused on creating the illusion. He knew he couldn't let her see him like this. He couldn't let her witness the transformation, the horror, the bestiality. Kasha, he gasped, his voice strained, his body shaking with the force of the impending change. Get away from me, Kasha opened her eyes, her focus broken, her expression filled with concern. She saw Rhys, his face contorted in pain, his body trembling, his golden eyes flickering with an unnatural, feral light. Rhys,
she cried.
What's happening? What's wrong? She rushed to his side, her hand reaching out to touch him, but he recoiled, his body convulsing, his bones cracking, his flesh rippling. Don't touch me, he roared, his voice a guttural growl, his teeth elongating into sharp fangs, his fingers transforming into claws. Kasha stared at him, her eyes wide with horror and disbelief. She saw the transformation unfold before her. The man she loved, the man she was bound to, turning into a creature of nightmare, a beast of shadow and fury. His clothes ripped and tore as his body expanded, his muscles bulging, his skin sprouting thick, dark fur. His face elongated into a wolfish snout, his eyes glowing with a predatory, amber light. His hands and feet transformed into powerful paws, tipped with sharp, black claws. In a matter of seconds, the man she knew was gone, replaced by a towering, monstrous wolf, its fangs bared in a menacing snarl, its eyes fixed on Kasha with a mixture of hunger and recognition. Kasha felt a surge of terror, a primal fear that threatened to overwhelm her. She wanted to run, to escape, to put as much distance as possible between herself and this terrifying creature. But she couldn't. She was bound to him, connected to him by the soul bond, by a love that transcended fear, that defied logic, that embraced even the darkest aspects of his being. She stood her ground, her body trembling, her heart pounding, but her gaze unwavering. She looked into the wolf's eyes, searching for a flicker of the man she knew, a spark of recognition, a remnant of their connection. She saw it, a fleeting moment of lucidity, a glimmer of Reese's consciousness amidst the raging fury of the beast. She saw pain. She saw anguish. She saw a desperate plea for help. "Reese," she whispered, her voice trembling, but filled with a surprising strength. "It's me, Kasha. I'm here. I'm not afraid." The wolf hesitated, its snarl softening, its eyes flickering with a mixture of confusion and relief. It took a step back, its body still tense, its muscles coiled, ready to attack. But it didn't. Kasha took a tentative step forward, her hand outstretched, her heart pounding with a mixture of fear and hope. She knew that she was taking a risk, that she was putting her life in danger, but she couldn't abandon him. She couldn't leave him to the mercy of the curse. She reached out for his changed form and waited. Chapter 15. The Trial of Trust and Sacrifice. Kasha's outstretched hand trembled, hovering inches from the massive, fur-covered head of the transformed Reese. The air crackled with tension, the silence of whispering pines broken only by the wolf's ragged breathing and the frantic beat of Kasha's heart. She looked into the wolf's eyes, searching for a flicker of the man she loved, a sign that he was still there, trapped within the monstrous form. She saw the feral intensity, the predatory hunger, but she also saw something else, a glimmer of recognition, a spark of the soul bond that connected them. "Reese," she whispered, her voice soft but firm, her gaze unwavering. "It's me, Kasha. I'm here. I'm not afraid. I know you're in there." The wolf Reese whined, a low, guttural sound that was both mournful and menacing. He took a step back, his massive body shaking, his claws digging into the soft earth. He was fighting the curse, struggling to control the beast within, to resist the urge to attack, to flee. Kasha held her ground, her hand still outstretched, a beacon of hope in the encroaching darkness. She knew that this was a crucial moment, a test of their bond, a trial of trust and sacrifice. She had to prove to him, to the wolf, that she loved him, that she accepted him, even in this monstrous form. "I love you, Reese," she said, her voice stronger now, filled with a conviction that surprised even herself. "I love all of you, the man and the wolf. I'm not afraid of you. I trust you." The wolf's eyes flickered, the amber glow softening slightly. He lowered his head, his massive snout nudging Kasha's hand, a tentative gesture, a silent plea for connection. Kasha felt a surge of relief, of hope, of overwhelming love. She gently stroked the wolf's fur, her fingers tracing the contours of his massive head, her touch soothing, reassuring. The wolf shuddered, a low rumble emanating from his chest. He leaned into her touch, his body relaxing slightly, the tension easing from his muscles. He closed his eyes, his breathing becoming slower, more regular. Kasha continued to stroke his fur, whispering words of love, of comfort, of acceptance. She spoke of their connection, of their shared destiny, of their commitment to protecting the balance. Slowly, gradually, the transformation began to reverse. The wolf's body shrank, his fur receding, his bones shifting back into their human form. His claws retracted, his fangs shortened, his eyes returned to their familiar golden hue. Reese collapsed to his knees, his body naked and trembling, his face etched with exhaustion and shame. He looked up at Kasha, his golden eyes filled with a mixture of gratitude and fear. "Kasha," he gasped, his voice hoarse, his body shaking. I almost hurt you. I almost lost control." Kasha knelt beside him, wrapping her arms around him, holding him close. She felt his body trembling against hers, his heart pounding in sync with her own. "You didn't," she said, her voice soft and reassuring. "You fought it. You controlled it. You came back to me." Reese buried his face in her shoulder, his body shaking with sobs. He had never felt so vulnerable, so exposed, so ashamed. He had always feared this moment, the moment when someone he loved would witness the horror of his curse, the bestiality that lay within him. But Kasha hadn't flinched. She hadn't run. She hadn't rejected him. She had stood her ground. She had offered him her love, her trust, her acceptance. She had saved him, not just from the curse, but from himself. "I'm a monster, Kasha," he whispered, his voice choked with emotion. "A beast. How can you love me?" Kasha lifted his face, her hands cupping his cheeks, her thumbs wiping away his tears. She looked into his golden eyes, her gaze filled with a love that was both fierce and tender. "You are not a monster, Reese," she said. "You are a man, a good man, who has been burdened with a terrible curse. And I love you, all of you, the man and the wolf. I accept you. I embrace you. I will stand by you no matter what." Reese stared at her, his eyes filled with wonder and gratitude. He had never known such love, such acceptance, such unwavering support. It was a love that healed, a love that empowered, a love that gave him the strength to face his demons, to control his curse, to embrace his destiny. They stayed there, in the heart of Whispering Pines, for a long while, holding each other, drawing strength from their bond, their love, their shared commitment to protecting the balance. The trial of trust had been passed, the sacrifice had been made, and their connection had been forged stronger than ever before. He needed to tell her how the curse began, how his ancestors had brought it on, and how it might be connected to the current danger. He was about to speak when a piercing bird call cut through the silence. It was Alara, the herbalist from the village.
Danger.
Chapter 16. The Battle Against the Inner Demons. Alara's warning cry, sharp and urgent, shattered the fragile peace of Whispering Pines. Reese and Kasha sprang apart, their bodies tensing, their senses alert. The brief respite, the moment of connection and healing, was over. The danger was real, and it was closing in. "They've found us," Reese said, his voice grim, his golden eyes scanning the surrounding forest. "The hunters or the shades or both." He quickly gathered his torn clothes, his movements swift and efficient, his mind racing, calculating their next move. Kasha, still shaken by Reese's transformation and the emotional intensity of the past hour, struggled to regain her composure, to focus on the immediate threat. "We need to move," she said, her voice trembling slightly, but filled with a newfound determination. "We can't stay here." Reese nodded, his expression grave. "The illusion won't hold them for long," he said. "They'll realize it's a deception, and they'll be back on our trail." He paused, his gaze meeting Kasha's. "But we have an advantage now," he added. "You've replenished your strength, and we know about the curse." He hesitated, his golden eyes filled with a mixture of shame and hope. He had revealed his darkest secret, his greatest fear, and Kasha had accepted him. She had loved him, even in his monstrous form. It had given him a strength he had never known before, a confidence to control the beast within, to harness the power of the curse for good. "I can use the wolf," he said, his voice low and intense. "I can fight them, protect you, buy us time to escape." Kasha stared at him, her mind reeling with conflicting emotions. She was still terrified of the wolf, of the primal power, the potential for violence. But she also trusted Reese. She loved him. She believed in his ability to control the beast, to use it for good. "Are you sure?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "Can you control it?" Reese nodded, his expression determined. "I can," he said. "I have to. For you, for your mother, for Oakhaven." He took a deep breath, closed his eyes, and focused his mind. He felt the familiar surge of energy, the burning sensation in his chest, the agonizing transformation. But this time it was different. He wasn't fighting it, he wasn't resisting it. He was embracing it, controlling it, shaping it to his will. He opened his eyes, his golden gaze now replaced by the amber glow of the wolf. He stood on two legs, his body still mostly human, but his hands and feet were tipped with sharp claws, his teeth elongated into fangs, his face covered in a thin layer of fur. He was a hybrid, a creature of both man and wolf, a being of immense power and terrifying potential. But he was also Reese, the man Kasha loved, the man who was bound to her by the soul bond, the man who would protect her with his life. "Let's go," he said, his voice a guttural growl, but filled with a human intelligence, a human determination. They moved swiftly and silently through the forest, Reese leading the way, his enhanced senses guiding them, his powerful body clearing a path through the dense undergrowth. Kasha followed close behind, her own senses heightened by the soul bond, her magic ready to be deployed. They encountered several groups of hunters, small bands of fanatics armed with weapons and shadow magic. Rhys fought them with a ferocity that both terrified and awed Kasha. He used his claws and fangs, his enhanced strength and speed, to disarm and incapacitate them, avoiding lethal blows, striving to minimize the bloodshed. Kasha supported him, using her magic to create shields, to deflect attacks, to confuse and disorient their enemies. They worked together, their powers synchronized, their movements coordinated, their souls connected. But the hunters were relentless, their numbers seemingly endless. They kept coming, wave after wave, driven by their twisted faith, their fanatical devotion to the shadow beast. As they fought, Rhys began to struggle. The curse was taking its toll, the beast within clawing at his control, demanding to be unleashed, to kill, to destroy. He felt his human consciousness slipping, his rational mind fading, replaced by a primal rage, a bloodlust that threatened to consume him. Kasha sensed his struggle, felt his pain, his anguish, his desperate fight against the inner demons. She knew that she had to help him, that she had to find a way to pull him back from the brink, to restore his humanity. She reached out to him, not physically, but through the soul bond, sending him a surge of love, of acceptance, of unwavering support. She spoke to him, not with words, but with thoughts, with emotions, with images of their connection, their shared destiny, their commitment to protecting the balance. Rhys, she pleaded, her voice echoing in his mind, her love a beacon in the encroaching darkness. Don't give in. Don't let the beast win. I believe in you. I love you.
Come back to me.
Rhys the wolf hesitated, his body trembling, his amber eyes flickering with a mixture of rage and recognition. He heard Kasha's voice, felt her love, her unwavering support. It was an anchor, a lifeline, a connection to his humanity. He fought back, drawing upon the strength of the soul bond, upon his love for Kasha, upon his commitment to protecting the innocent. He wrestled with the beast within, pushing it back, suppressing it, regaining control. Slowly, gradually, the wolf receded, the human returned. Rhys collapsed to his knees, his body exhausted, his mind drained, but his golden eyes shining with a renewed clarity, a renewed determination. Thank you, Kasha, he whispered, his voice hoarse, his body shaking. You saved me again. Kasha knelt beside him, wrapping her arms around him, holding him close. We save each other, she said. That's what the bond was about. But they were running out of time. Chapter 17. The Journey Through the Shadowed Lands. With the immediate threat of the hunters temporarily subdued, but the knowledge of their relentless pursuit ever present, Rhys and Kasha knew they couldn't linger. They had to reach Eleanor, and the only clue they possessed was the black feather, the mark of the shades, the trackers in league with the hunters. The shades are creatures of shadow, Rhys explained, his voice still recovering from the strain of his partial transformation. They are bound to the Shadowlands, a realm that exists alongside our own, a place of darkness and twisted magic. He described the Shadowlands as a distorted reflection of the real world, a place where familiar landscapes were warped and corrupted, where the laws of nature were bent and broken. It was a dangerous and unpredictable realm, a place where the unwary could easily become lost, trapped, or consumed by the darkness. The feather, it's a link, a pathway, he said, holding up the iridescent black feather. It can guide us to the Shadowlands, to the place where they've taken your mother. But entering the Shadowlands was a perilous undertaking. It required a specific ritual, a crossing of the veil between worlds, a journey that could irrevocably alter those who dared to undertake it. Rhys knew the ritual, the ancient words, the precise movements, the necessary ingredients. He had learned it long ago, as part of his training to control the Lycan curse, to understand the forces that shaped his own existence. They gathered the necessary components, rare herbs, specific minerals, a vial of Kasha's blood, a symbol of her connection to the winter line. They found a secluded spot, a hidden clearing deep within Holofong Forest, where the veil between worlds was known to be thin. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the forest floor, Rhys began the ritual. He chanted the ancient words, his voice resonating with power, his golden eyes glowing with an unnatural light. He drew symbols on the ground with the minerals, placed the herbs in a specific pattern, and held the vial of Kasha's blood aloft. The air grew thick with magic, the trees swayed, the whispers intensified. A shimmering portal began to open, a swirling vortex of darkness and light, a gateway to the shadow lands. Kasha felt a surge of fear, a primal dread of the unknown, of the darkness that awaited them. But she also felt a surge of determination, a fierce resolve to save her mother, to face whatever challenges lay ahead. Rhys turned to her, his golden eyes filled with a mixture of apprehension and love. "Are you ready?" he asked, his voice soft but firm. Kasha nodded, her heart pounding, her hand gripping his. "I am," she said. Together, they stepped into the portal, hand in hand, their bodies dissolving into the swirling vortex, their souls connected by the unbreakable bond that bound them together. They emerged into a world of shadows, a distorted reflection of Holofong Forest. The trees were twisted and gnarled, their branches skeletal and barren, their leaves a sickly, grayish-green. The sky was a perpetual twilight, a murky expanse of gray and black, with no sun, no moon, no stars. The air was cold and damp, heavy with the scent of decay and something else, something acrid and unsettling, the smell of shadow magic. The whispers were gone, replaced by a chilling silence, a void that pressed down on Kasha, making her skin crawl. "Welcome to the Shadowlands, Kasha," Rhys said, his voice low and cautious, his senses alert, his gaze constantly scanning the surroundings. "Stay close to me. And be careful. Nothing here is as it seems." They began their journey, following the pull of the black feather, which seemed to vibrate with a faint energy, guiding them through the twisted landscape. The forest was filled with strange and menacing creatures, shadowy wolves, twisted birds, grotesque insects, all manifestations of the darkness that permeated this realm. Rhys protected Kasha, using his enhanced senses, his Lycan strength, and his knowledge of shadow magic to ward off the creatures, to navigate the treacherous terrain, to find a path through the darkness. Kasha, in turn, used her own magic, her connection to the forest, her link to the soul bond, to support Rhys, to heal his injuries, to bolster his strength. They worked together, their powers complementing each other, their love a beacon in the desolate landscape. As they journeyed deeper into the Shadowlands, they encountered illusions, traps, and obstacles designed to test their courage, their resolve, their sanity. They saw visions of their past, their regrets, their fears, their deepest desires. They were tempted with promises of power, of escape, of reunion with lost loved ones. But they held firm, their bond unbreakable, their love unwavering. They resisted the temptations, they overcame the challenges, they stayed true to their purpose to rescue Eleanor and to prevent the shadow beast from escaping its prison. The land continued to twist and turn, and every step seemed to lead them into deeper peril. They were nearing something. Kasha felt it in her bones, a cold, gnawing dread. Chapter 18. The Unmasking of the True Enemy. The black feather, their only guide, pulsed with increasing intensity, drawing Rhys and Kasha deeper into the heart of the Shadowlands. The landscape grew increasingly bizarre and menacing, the twisted trees resembling skeletal claws reaching out to grasp them, the ground beneath their feet shifting and unstable. The silence, once oppressive, was now broken by unsettling sounds, whispers that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere, disembodied laughter, the rustling of unseen wings, the growls of creatures lurking just beyond their vision. They finally reached their destination, a ruined fortress, a crumbling structure of black stone that seemed to exude an aura of malevolence. It was a place of ancient evil, a stronghold of shadow magic, a prison where darkness reigned supreme. "This is it," Rhys said, his voice grim, his golden eyes fixed on the fortress. "This is where they've taken your mother." He could sense Eleanor's presence within the fortress, a faint flicker of life amidst the overwhelming darkness. He could also sense the presence of the hunters, their twisted energy, their fanatical devotion to the shadow beast. But he sensed something else, something far more powerful, far more dangerous. He felt the presence of the creature that had been manipulating Eldrin, the force behind the hunters' actions, the true enemy they had been unknowingly fighting all along. It was not the shadow beast, not yet. It was something else, something ancient and cunning, something that had been pulling the strings from the shadows, orchestrating events to further its own twisted agenda. As they approached the fortress, the black feather in Rhys's hand burst into flames, consumed by a sudden surge of shadow magic. The gateway, the link to the real world, was severed. They were trapped, alone, in the heart of enemy territory. The fortress gates creaked open, revealing a courtyard bathed in an eerie, green light. Standing in the center of the courtyard, surrounded by a group of hooded hunters, was a figure Kasha recognized with a jolt of horror and disbelief. It was Alara, the young herbalist from Oakhaven, the woman who had promised to help Kasha, the woman who had seemed so kind, so compassionate, so trustworthy. But now, Alara's face was transformed, her eyes glowing with an unnatural, green light, her features twisted with a cruel, malevolent smile. She was no longer the gentle healer, the friendly neighbor. She was something else, something ancient and powerful, something that had been hiding in plain sight, waiting for the opportune moment to reveal its true nature. "Welcome, Kasha Rhys," Alara said, her voice a chilling whisper that echoed through the courtyard. "I have been expecting you." Kasha stared at her, her mind reeling with shock and betrayal. "Alara, but why?" she stammered. "You are a friend." Alara laughed, a harsh, mocking sound that sent shivers down Kasha's spine.
"Friend?" she said.
"I have no friends, only pawns. And you, my dear Kasha, are a very valuable pawn indeed." She gestured towards a raised platform at the far end of the courtyard, where Eleanor lay bound and unconscious, a silver dagger poised above her heart. "Your mother," Alara said, "is the key. Her sacrifice will break the seal, unleash the shadow beast, and usher in a new era of darkness. An era where I will rule supreme." Rhys stepped forward, his body tensing, his golden eyes blazing with fury. "You won't touch her," he growled, his voice filled with a primal rage. Alara smiled, a cruel, confident smile. "And who will stop me?" she asked. "You? A cursed wolf, a broken man, teetering on the edge of madness? Or perhaps Kasha, the naive baker, the whisperer who doesn't even understand the true extent of her own power?" She paused, her gaze sweeping over them, her eyes filled with contempt.
"You are both fools," she said.
"You have played right into my hands. You have renewed the seal, making it easier to break. You have revealed your weaknesses, your vulnerabilities. You have given me everything I need to achieve my goals." Kasha felt a surge of anger, a fierce determination to prove Alara wrong, to save her mother, to defeat this ancient evil that had been lurking in their midst. "You underestimate us, Alara," she said, her voice firm, her gaze unwavering. "You may have power, but you don't have love. You don't have the bond that connects us, the strength that comes from fighting for something greater than yourself." Alara scoffed, her eyes flashing with disdain. "Love," she said. "A weakness. A sentimental delusion. Power is the only thing that matters. And soon, I will have all the power I need." She raised her hand, signaling the hunters to attack. Rhys, anticipating the move, shifted into his hybrid form, his claws extended, his fangs bared, his body ready to fight. But Alara was not focused on Rhys. Her gaze was fixed on Kasha, her eyes filled with a strange mixture of hatred and fear. "You, Kasha," she said, her voice a chilling whisper. "You are the true threat. You are the one who can stop me. But you won't. Because You don't know who you really are. You don't know your true heritage. She paused, a cruel smile twisting her lips. You are not just a winter, Kasha, she said. You are also one of us. The words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken implications, a revelation that threatened to shatter Kasha's world, to unravel everything she thought she knew about herself, her family, her destiny. Alara was about to reveal everything. Chapter 19. The Dawn of a New Beginning. Alara's words struck Kasha like a physical blow, leaving her reeling, her mind struggling to grasp the implications. You are not just a winter, Kasha. You are also one of us. What did it mean? How could she be connected to this creature of darkness, this ancient evil that threatened to destroy everything she held dear? You lie, Kasha cried, her voice filled with defiance, but also with a growing sense of unease. She wanted to reject Alara's words, to dismiss them as a cruel deception, but a part of her, a deep, hidden part, recognized a flicker of truth in them. Alara laughed, a chilling sound that echoed through the courtyard.
Doi, she said.
Ask your beloved Reese. He knows. He's known all along. Kasha turned to Reese, her eyes searching his, pleading for denial, for reassurance. But Reese's face was a mask of pain and regret, his golden eyes filled with a sorrow that confirmed Kasha's worst fears. It's true, Kasha, he said, his voice heavy with emotion. I didn't want to tell you. I didn't want to burden you with this knowledge, but it's true. He explained that Kasha's grandmother, Eleanor's mother, had not been a winter. She had been a member of the Fae, a creature of magic and shadow, who had fallen in love with a human, a winter, and had chosen to live in the human world, abandoning her heritage, severing her ties to the Fae realm. But she couldn't completely escape her true nature, Reese continued. The magic, the connection to the Shadowlands, it was still in her blood, passed down to her daughter, and then to you. He explained that Alara was also a member of the Fae, a powerful sorceress who had been exiled from the Fae realm long ago, for her cruelty, her ambition, her desire to dominate both the human and the Fae worlds. She had been biding her time, waiting for the opportune moment to return, to reclaim her power, to unleash the shadow beast and plunge the world into darkness. She's been manipulating events for years, Reese said, using Eldrin, the hunters, even your own family, to further her own twisted agenda. She knew about your heritage. She knew about the soul bond. She knew that you were the key to unlocking the shadow beast's prison. Kasha felt a wave of dizziness, of disbelief, of betrayal. Her whole life, her identity, her understanding of her family, had been a lie. She was not just a whisperer, a guardian of the balance. She was also a descendant of the Fae, a creature of shadow, a potential ally of the very darkness she was fighting against. But why didn't you tell me? She asked Reese, her voice trembling with emotion. Reese looked at her, his golden eyes filled with regret and love. I was afraid, he said. Afraid of how you would react, afraid that you would reject me, afraid that you would embrace the darkness, become like her. He gestured towards Alara, who was watching them with a cruel, triumphant smile. But I was wrong, Reese continued. I should have trusted you. I should have known that your love, your compassion, your inherent goodness would outweigh any darkness in your blood. Kasha felt a surge of anger, not at Reese, but at Alara, at the deception, the manipulation, the betrayal. She had been used, played, her life a pawn in a deadly game. But she would not be defeated. She would not succumb to the darkness. She would embrace her heritage, both the winter and the Fae, and use it to fight for the light. You may be my ancestor, Alara, Kasha said, her voice firm, her gaze unwavering. But I am not like you. I choose love. I choose compassion. I choose to protect the balance. I will not let you unleash the shadow beast. I will not let you destroy the world. Alara laughed, her eyes flashing with disdain. Brave words, little baker, she said.
But you're no match for me.
You don't even know how to use your power, how to control the magic that flows through your veins. She raised her hand, and the hunters surrounding the courtyard began to chant, their voices blending together in a dissonant chorus, their bodies swaying rhythmically. The air crackled with energy, the ground trembled, the green light emanating from Alara intensified. Rhys shifted into his hybrid form, his claws extended, his fangs bared, his body ready to fight. But Kasha knew that they couldn't defeat Alara with brute force, with weapons and magic alone. They needed something more, something that Alara didn't possess, something that came from the heart. Kasha closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and focused her mind. She reached out to Rhys, through the soul bond, drawing upon his strength, his love, his unwavering support. She reached out to the forest, to the ancient magic that flowed through her veins, both winter and fey. She opened her eyes, and they glowed with a vibrant, golden light, a light that was both human and fey, a light that represented the balance, the harmony, the power of love. She raised her hands, and a wave of energy surged outwards, engulfing the courtyard, pushing back the darkness, silencing the hunter's chant, disrupting Alara's magic. Alara staggered back, her eyes wide with surprise and fear. She had underestimated Kasha. She had underestimated the power of the soul bond, the power of love, the power of a heart that embraced both light and shadow. The battle was far from over, but for the first time, Kasha felt a sense of hope, a sense of confidence, a sense of knowing who she truly was. She was a whisperer, a guardian of the balance, a descendant of both the winters and the fey. She was Kasha, and she would fight for the dawn, for a new beginning, for a world where love and light triumphed over darkness and despair. The ritual to release the beast had begun, and she knew it was now or never. Chapter 20. The final confrontation of hearts. The wave of energy Kasha unleashed disrupted Alara's ritual, throwing the hunters into disarray, their chanting broken, their bodies flung back by the force of her power. But Alara, though momentarily stunned, quickly regained her composure, her eyes blazing with fury, her face contorted with a mixture of hatred and fear. "You may have disrupted my ritual, little baker," she hissed, her voice a venomous whisper, "but you cannot stop me. The shadow beast will be freed, and this world will be plunged into darkness." She raised her hands, summoning her own power, a dark, twisted magic that crackled in the air, making the shadows dance and writhe. The courtyard became a battleground, a clash of light and shadow, of love and hate, of hope and despair. Rhys, in his hybrid form, fought with the ferocity of a cornered wolf, his claws and fangs tearing through the hunters, his powerful body a shield protecting Kasha. But Alara was too strong, her magic too potent. She deflected his attacks with ease, her eyes fixed on Kasha, her true target. Kasha stood her ground, her body trembling with the effort of channeling her power, her heart pounding with a mixture of fear and determination. She knew that she was the only one who could stop Alara, the only one who could prevent the shadow beast from being unleashed. She drew upon the strength of the soul bond, upon her love for Rhys, upon her connection to both the winter and the fey heritage. She wove a tapestry of magic, a blend of light and shadow, of human and fey, a power that was both terrifying and beautiful. She sent bolts of golden energy towards Alara, deflecting her dark magic, pushing her back, forcing her to defend herself. She summoned the spirits of the forest, the whispers of her ancestors, the ancient power that flowed through her veins. The battle raged, a whirlwind of magic and fury, of light and shadow. The courtyard was filled with the clash of spells, the cries of the combatants, the roar of the wolf, the whispers of the spirits. Alara, despite her power, began to weaken. Kasha's love, her compassion, her unwavering commitment to protecting the balance, was a force she couldn't comprehend, a power she couldn't overcome. "You cannot win, Alara," Kasha said, her voice firm, her gaze unwavering. "Love is stronger than hate. Light is stronger than darkness. Hope is stronger than despair." Alara scoffed, her eyes flashing with disdain. "Foolish girl," she said. "You cling to sentimental delusions. Power is the only thing that matters, and I will have it all." She unleashed a final, desperate blast of dark magic, a torrent of shadow that threatened to engulf Kasha, to consume her entirely. But Kasha stood firm, her love a shield, her light a beacon. She reached deep within herself, drawing upon the very essence of her being, the power of her dual heritage, the strength of the soul bond. She unleashed a wave of pure, golden energy, a radiant light that shattered Alara's darkness, pushing it back, dispelling it completely. Alara screamed, her body convulsing, her form flickering, her power fading. The green light in her eyes dimmed, then vanished, replaced by a look of shock, of disbelief, of defeat. She collapsed to her knees, her body trembling, her voice a weak whisper. "No, it's not possible, I cannot be defeated." Kasha approached her, her heart filled with a mixture of pity and relief. The battle was over. The darkness had been vanquished. The balance had been restored. "It's over, Alara," she said, her voice soft but firm. "Your reign of terror is ended." Alara looked up at her, her eyes filled with a flicker of regret. "Perhaps," she whispered, "perhaps you are right. Perhaps love is stronger." Her body dissolved into shadows, fading away, leaving nothing behind but a faint scent of ozone and a lingering sense of sadness. Rhys, his transformation reversed, rushed to Kasha's side, his arms wrapping around her, holding her close. He had watched the battle, his heart filled with pride and awe, his love for her overflowing. "You did it, Kasha," he said, his voice choked with emotion. "You saved us all. You saved the world." Kasha leaned into his embrace, her body exhausted, her mind drained, but her heart filled with a profound sense of peace, of accomplishment, of love. They turned their attention to Eleanor, who was still lying unconscious on the platform. Kasha rushed to her side, her hands gently touching her mother's face, her magic flowing through her, healing her injuries, restoring her strength. Eleanor's eyes fluttered open, her gaze focusing on Kasha. "Kasha?" she whispered, her voice weak, but filled with relief. "Are you all right?" Kasha smiled, tears streaming down her face. "I'm fine, Mother," she said. "We're all fine. It's over." They helped Eleanor to her feet, supporting her as they walked out of the fortress, leaving the shadows behind, stepping into the dawn of a new beginning. The Shadowlands began to fade around them. The warped trees, the acrid smell, it all dissolved and they found themselves standing just on the edge of Oakhaven. The sun felt warm. It was over. Epilogue. The return to Oakhaven was met with a mixture of relief and celebration. The villagers, who had been huddled in their homes, fearing the worst, emerged to greet Kasha, Rhys, and Eleanor with cheers and tears of joy. The threat of the shadow beast, the terror of the hunters, had been lifted, and a new era of peace and prosperity had begun. Kasha, hailed as a hero, a savior, found herself at the center of a community that had once viewed her as simply the village baker. She embraced her new role, her newfound power, her dual heritage, using her magic and her compassion to heal the wounds of the past, to guide her people towards a brighter future. She worked to rebuild the trust that had been shattered by Eldrin's and Alara's betrayals, fostering a sense of unity and cooperation among the villagers. She established a council, a group of trusted individuals, to help her govern, to ensure that the mistakes of the past would never be repeated. Rhys, freed from the shame and secrecy of his Lycan curse, stood by Kasha's side, his love and support unwavering. He used his strength, his knowledge of the forest, his connection to the Shadowlands, to protect Oakhaven, to defend it against any future threats. He also worked to control his curse, to harness the power of the wolf for good, to become a true guardian of the balance. He found solace and strength in Kasha's love, in her acceptance of his dual nature, in the unbreakable bond that connected their souls. Eleanor, her health restored, became a source of wisdom and guidance for Kasha, sharing her memories of the past, her knowledge of the Winter family, her understanding of the delicate balance between the human and fae worlds. She watched with pride as her daughter embraced her destiny, becoming the leader, the protector, the healer that Oakhaven needed. Kasha and Rhys, Their love deepened by their shared experiences, their souls intertwined by the ancient bond, built a life together in Oakhaven. They shared a home, a purpose, a destiny. They faced challenges, they overcame obstacles, they celebrated triumphs, always together, always connected, always in love. They often visited Silverwood, the sacred grove where their bond had been forged, where they had faced their greatest fears, where they had discovered the true meaning of love and sacrifice. They would stand beneath the ancient pine tree, hand in hand, their hearts filled with gratitude and peace. Kasha never forgot Thomas, her first love, the man who had shared her life for so many years. She honored his memory. She cherished the love they had shared. She kept his spirit alive in her heart. But she also embraced her new love, her connection to Reese, her destiny as a whisperer, a guardian of the balance, a bridge between two worlds. Years passed and Oakhaven flourished under Kasha's leadership. The village became a haven of peace and prosperity, a place where humans and fae could coexist, where magic and nature thrived, where love and light triumphed over darkness and despair. One evening, as Kasha and Reese stood on the porch of their cottage, watching the sunset paint the sky with vibrant colors, Kasha felt a familiar stirring within her, a sense of connection to the forest, to the whispers in the wind, to the ancient magic that flowed through her veins. She turned to Reese, her golden eyes shining with a mixture of love and anticipation. "The whispers," she said, her voice soft but firm. "They're calling again." Reese smiled, his own golden eyes reflecting her love, her strength, her unwavering spirit. He knew what it meant. A new generation of whisperers was emerging, a new cycle of guardians was beginning. And he and Kasha, together, would guide them, protect them, teach them the ways of the balance, ensuring that the light would always triumph over the darkness. The cycle was complete, and they were ready.